Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to do our fourth and final lesson in our Westward expansion series, and this one is going to come back around to the Native Americans. So when we talked about Native Americans the last time, we talked about the reservation policies and how the U.S. government had, quote unquote, an Indian problem, and they engaged in several wars, which ended up hurting the Native Americans who were eventually forced onto reservations. And unfortunately, that mistreatment of them doesn't end with the being forced onto those reservations. It is going to continue into a destruction of their culture. So conditions on the reservation continued to get worse. So those agents that we talked about, those Indian agents, are going to continue to be greedy. They're going to take supplies that are meant for the Native Americans and turn around and sell them, or they're not going to deliver them. You're going to have the government continuing to not follow through on promises that it makes. And kind of the final blow, if you will, to Native Americans is going to be when the government decides to begin with the Americanization of Indians. So they are going to start encouraging them to adopt American ways. So stop dressing the way that you dress. Stop, hunting buffalo. You should be farming. You shouldn't have names like Chief Red Cloud. You should have names like Bob Smith. And so all of that is going to change. They're going to be told that their native religions are uncivilized and bad, and the government's going to send teachers in to try to turn everybody to Christianity. And this is really going to kind of erase the Indian way of life. And that's also going to come through the Dawes Act, which we'll look at here in a second. So as you can see from the picture, you kind of get this change of Indians to become quote unquote civilized, which, basically means to become more white. So we're going to look at a lot more of these pictures in class. You're going to get a chance to kind of see the way that the Indian groups were Americanized as we move throughout history. So the American governments do what is referred to as forced assimilation. So they felt that the Native Americans needed to be civilized so they could fit into quote unquote proper society, meaning white society. They basically forced them to be white. When you go through the process of adapting or adjusting somebody's culture to fit a particular group or nation, this is known as assimilation, which is what happens. So the government actually establishes schools throughout the Northeast to bring children off the reservations and basically turn them more white. So one of the most famous schools, and it's the picture that's listed up there on the top right-hand corner, is the Carlisle Indian School, which was located in Pennsylvania. So you had children coming from reservations all the way out west, so from Oklahoma Territory, from Arizona Territory, all different bands. You had Cheyenne and Sioux and Arapaho and Apache, and their children would be sent on the railroads to different schools. And so as you can see on the bottom, on the left is a picture of how one of the young men arrived at the Indian school, and on the left is how they arrived, and on the right is the picture of what they looked like by the time they finished in the Indian school. And so this process of assimilation ended up being detrimental to the culture and survival of many Native American tribes in America. So here's some pictures, and we're going to look at a lot more of them in class, but to give you an idea, this is a band of Apache children that were sent to the Carlisle Indian School. So this is a picture to begin with of how they looked when they arrived at the Carlisle Indian School, and this is what they look like 6 months later. So if I back up, and you can kind of see it again. So this is the native way that they show up, and then once they were civilized, this is the way that they looked, and you can kind of see them here side by side. So they actually are standing positioned in the same place. So this is the same children in the same positions, and we're going to do some more in-class discussions on many different pictures looking like this, is to kind of get an in-depth as to what you guys think about this treatment of Native Americans. So in 1887, the U.S. government passes the Dawes Act, and it said that male Indians could claim 160 acres that would be their own private property. The government hoped that this would replace the Indian idea that property was owned communally, because up to this point it was the belief of Native Americans that people didn't own the land, that everybody owned the land, that the land and buffalo and the rain, everything was a gift given from the various gods of Indian culture, and that what was owned or what the tribe possessed was able to be used by everybody. And they wanted to discourage that. They wanted to impart the European American ideal of I own my own property, it's mine, and it doesn't belong to everybody. And they hoped that the Indians would eventually become farmers. And they also hoped that if they claimed the 160 acres, the Indians, that this would allow them to become citizens and be able to vote. And they were hoping that that would kind of be a benefit that the Indians would want, and therefore they would claim those 160 acres. The weaknesses of this plan is that it threatened Indian culture. So a lot of the older tribe, elders hated this idea. They didn't want to lose what they had had for thousands and thousands of years, and saw it as a destruction of their cultural way of life, which it was. Indian agents were greedy, and the Indians are not going to get what the government ends up promising them. It ends up creating a lot of economic hardships for the Indians. The reservation lands that they're given, that we've already kind of talked about, is horrible land. So they're told that they can go in and they teach them how to farm, but the land isn't fertile and it's not good for farming. So a lot of them end up starving because they're not able to actually grow enough food to feed their families or the rest of the tribe. The reservation schools offered really bad education, and they don't get a lot of help from the government. So you get a lot of malnutrition, which means that they don't get enough to eat, and the food that they do eat isn't any good. Remember, these are people that lived off of the buffalo, and up to this point were very nutritious, survived off of what the land provided them, and had never had problems with food and with not having proper nutrition before. So that was definitely a hardship for them. And they don't get medical attention for problems that they're having. A lot of end up selling off Indian lands to white settlers. The government does, and this ends up making their reservations smaller. And the Indians who leave the reservations face discrimination, unemployment, and poverty. So people wouldn't hire them when they went out for different jobs. They weren't able to make lots of money, and they were very discriminated against, a lot like what we saw with the Jim Crow laws against African Americans in the South at the time. And this is an example of kind of some of the things that the government did. On the left is a poster of the selling off of Indian land. So even though the government promised them the land, you had Indian agents who would go through and sell the land off. And they would sell it for, a fraction of a price. And you can see there in the bottom, this is 1910, and you've got all the different states and the number of acres and how much it would cost. And on the right is a political cartoon of kind of the fact that the Dawes Act ends up basically chewing up Indian land and taking it over and providing it to the white settlers. So overall, this ends up being a really bad deal for the Native Americans, and really for many tribes destroys the beautiful culture that they had for centuries. So we're going to look more in depth at the Dawes Act and of the Carlisle Indian School when I see you again. So make sure you bring your notes and be prepared to kind of discuss your feelings of what you've seen. So make sure you answer the questions at the end of the Google form, and I will see you in class. Have a wonderful night.